here comes the potentially dumb question. What if somebody made an insert, a shim, if you will, that could surround the small primer, and then you could actually insert a small primer into a large primer pocket case? Is the depth of the primer different? Are they shallower?
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the large versus small rifle primers experiment, part 2. Hot Shots Part 2. That's a good movie. You ever see Hot Shots Part 2? Jim to my right.
I actually haven't seen that movie.
Answer the question.
I haven't seen that movie.
Okay, that's a good one.
I wonder what our French listeners think of your pronunciation.
That's the title of the movie.
Oh,
Do. Yeah.
Oh, Do?
Yeah, it's part 2, but it's a slapstick comedy. So.
Oh, got it.
Across from us, Coach Prime. Ryan, do you know who Coach Prime is?
I don't.
I think he's going to be a pretty big deal this year.
Probably right.
Ryan Muckenhurst.
Is this real sports references?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Ryan Muckenhurst, everybody. If you've ever seen the Vortex Nation podcast, you're quite familiar. I just want to call you Coach Prime because, with the primers and everything. It's a play on words. Sometimes you hit, sometimes you don't. Right, Jim?
I still think these get better and better every time, Mark.
His intros,
yeah.
Phenomenal.
They're not all going to be 10 out of 10s.
Sometimes they're 11s.
Ryan, you've been doing some experimenting.
Yes.
Were you there
with the large versus? No. I had some stuff going on.
I was trapped in a swirling toilet bowl of flight delays yesterday, so I missed the experiment. So really, he's the only guy to be able to speak directly to it.
He's the only guy with the information.
Having worked with the two of you, traveled with the two of you, broken bread with the two of you, you would have just been standing back and been like, what the hell is this guy doing?
I was I was letting Ryan know that I wouldn't be able to, I'll put quotation marks around it, help him last night.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, he was making me feel better about it, but also it made me feel worse about it too, because he's like, really, what would you be able to do? And I was like, moral support. Hey, but that's helpful sometimes.
Can be.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed that soda last time.
We had
that was delightful.
Or 7-Up.
It was a 7-Up. You always want to call it a Sprite.
I don't know what the difference is, man.
No, I don't even know what we were drinking.
Was it Sierra Mist?
No, it wasn't that.
It was one of the two big names in the citrus
Sierra Mist is a big name. Jerk.
I don't think Sierra Mist is a thing anymore.
Yeah, it might not be. Isn't that the Safeway brand of soda?
I don't know.
No, it's not.
There's a great Mitch Hedberg joke.
I'm saying it's the Safeway brand of.
I have no idea.
A 7-Up, a Sprite.
No clue. Mitch Hedberg joke about making 7-Up or Sprite at home. He's like, it's lemon and lime, but there's more to it than that.
It's true.
Yeah.
I imagine there is.
Yeah.
Did you crack a soda out of that fancy fridge you used last night? I heard that didn't really go as planned.
No, it didn't. It's not a fridge it's the size of a fridge, but
right.
the internal compartment within it is much smaller than the rest of this. So you could get this block of wood in there, and not a lot more.
Yeah.
You know what I also remembered? I forgot to put the rack back in it. Somebody's going to be upset.
Oh,
maybe you can get down there before they find out. Well, let's talk about it.
Okay.
We've
wasted 3 minutes.
If you haven't noticed, we got a little bit off track there. I covered a lot of important ground. Ryan, let's talk. What did you do last night?
Okay.
Maybe recap.
Turning back the clock to the original podcast, we talked about these parameters and targets that we're going to hit. And I'm going to tell you right off the bat, we dropped one of them out of there. That was the 30, 31 degree temperature range, because quite simply it was too difficult to maintain that temperature with the handling of the ammunition, moving it from the chilling chamber to which was in a cooler, which then had cold packs in it, to another freezer for intermediate storage. There's a timing and a cadence to getting the ammunition out of the carrier, wiping the frost off, putting the ammunition in the gun, firing the weapon. All of this had to be done in very short order so that you didn't introduce too much like temperature to the ammunition. And what I quickly realized is that when you take something that's 0 degrees and you introduce it to anything above freezing, the amount of condensation and then frost that occurs instantaneously is a lot to manage.
The old cold beer can effect.
Yeah, except it's like snow.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge. And what I realized right away is if we were looking to control things here, I did the opposite of that. Unintentionally, but that was just how it worked out. And I told the fellas last night, I think we're going to revisit this. I promised to myself and the viewers and listeners that we're going to do this again, but we're going to do it when it's like cold outside.
But I don't think you didn't get still got information.
I did. I saw hoping for the result that I found. So that was really cool.
Okay.
Just to give a very fast recap for somebody who's listening to this and hasn't listened to the last one, the thing that we're experimenting here with is that we've noticed that now some ammunition manufacturers were putting small primers in cases that we'd normally expect to see large rifle primers in, and we're wondering if there's going to be a performance difference between those. And one of the standout potential, if you think about it just maybe based on like barroom ammunition knowledge that you may have, temperature change could cause a difference in performance between those two. And we're trying to figure out if small rifle primer is good to go in big temperature changes, particularly cold temps, or if there's issue there. So that's what Ryan was doing.
Yeah. So my big concern was like ignition issues, where that smaller primer having considerably less like priming compound, the chemical part of the primer, was not going to give us enough like flame veracity to ignite that powder charge, or somehow the powder was going to be affected by that cold temperature as well, and then result in like a very anemic performance or delayed ignition, or something catastrophic that if you were on a hunt and it was cold out and you were using this ammunition, this would create a problem. And the original theories were either it made no difference, and that's why we're seeing it here. Like it's not going to be a negative impact, or it made a positive impact, or something else, right?
Or, something that...
Yeah. And I was delighted to find that it still worked.
Good.
Fantastic.
Good start.
What powder did you reload with?
So we're going to go down the list. I'm not going to divulge the load data, like the grain weight, but I'll tell you this. So we were shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor. It was out of a Tikka T3. The gun was equipped with a dead air Sandman tie suppressor. We're using a magneto speed to register velocity. The cases that we're using were Alpha Munitions, small primer pocket 6.5 Creedmoor, large primer pocket 6.5 Creedmoor. I was testing the CCI small rifle primer, small Magnum rifle primer, large rifle Magnum primer. H4350 powder. Everything was set up the same from the ammunition standpoint. So exact same charge weights, as in controlling this to the best of my ability as a hobbyist hand loader. Cartridge overall length as measured to the ogive, 2.195 inches. It's very standard. And yeah, so
bullet,
140 grain ELD from Hornady.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good call. So, everything was set up, trimmed, chamfered, deburred, compartmentalized, marked as much as I could control it. And then I also tested against some factory Hornady 140 grain match ammo. As a baseline. I didn't do it at the cold weather stuff. I will do that later. But at room temperature, which initially we said was 72 degrees, the range is at 64. 23 to 24% relative humidity in there. So I just wanted to see what should I expect for performance out of this factory ammo from an SD and a velocity standpoint, groups, etc. In doing the shooting, so each set of ammunition. So for instance, large rifle primer, standard, 10 rounds broken into 2 5-round subsets. I would fire 5 rounds at a target. I would then forced air cool the chamber and bore and suppressor for 5 minutes. I would then take that off. I'd do another 5-round set or subset. And so there's your data set for the large rifle primer. Did the same thing for the small rifle primer. Small rifle primer Magnum, large rifle primer Magnum. And then did that at the room temperature of 64 degrees and then at the cold temperature, which we're going to call 0 to 15 degrees. And I'm saying that because the chiller got us to 0 degrees. The freezer set at 15 degrees. It was to and from the chiller and the freezer and a little bit of time in between there. So when it got to the cold weather firing point, the bigger challenge I had is I knew that I had a limited amount of time to take a single cartridge out of the cooler that I had it in, packed in ice packs or cold packs, get the frost off of the case, get it in the gun, and fire that. And so like me opening the lid of the cooler was introducing, warm ambient temperature to that case. Me handling the case, wiping the frost off, chambering it in a chamber that just fired around was going to start dumping heat into that case.
Sure.
And so I was like, I have to get this thing out of the cooler and wiped in like 2 seconds.
I wonder, I'm thinking of when you take a steak out of the freezer, right?
Okay.
Put it on your counter, which could be, you're going from essentially freezing, whatever the temp your freezer is at.
Probably 0 to 15 degrees, 0 to 20 degrees maybe.
Right. And then you put it on the counter for even like a couple hours. It's like, it appears there's no change. You know what I mean? So I'm just wondering at what rate.
I don't know.
No, and I'm not asking you to know.
Yeah.
Like.
So if I had one of those little.
It's more of like a curiosity as I think about it. Like, I wonder if it's happening faster than we might think or actually nominally.
I think it's mostly nominal.
Yeah.
The amount of anxiety I had during this was outstanding.
I mean, hearing about, just your process and what you were having, it reminded me of like the limited competition shooting that I've done. Because you're like, there's time, there's pressure, there's something on the line, you're trying to make it work. Because and I think you were getting to this, Ryan, the chiller, or the weather machine as I like to call it, do they call it the chiller? It's the chiller?
I don't know what it's called.
Anyway, is not in the same range as where you need to do your firing.
It's quite a distance.
Yeah.
I didn't run, but I walked very briskly.
Probably about 100 yards-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And people are probably wondering, why did you go through this when you live in Wisconsin? It's the end of June.
Yeah.
When we thought about this, it has been a hot June as well. And so we've been discussing having to redo this test in the wintertime, but then we would have to wait for winter.
Yeah.
And that's boring.
Well, and also, like, we had this machine.
We got a machine.
Which I wouldn't say it didn't work.
We use it for other things, too.
Yeah.
But we had a machine.
Huge shout out to our test group for allowing and humoring me to do this. Matt's like, he like gives me the program, like tells me how to do it. And I'm like, oh man, I'm so afraid I'm going to blow this thing up. You'll be fine. So it's a really cool machine. If you want to take something from very warm to very cold in an extraordinarily short amount of time, this is the machine to do it. You can flood that chamber down to like negative 30 C or negative 35 C, like instantly.
How long did it take? We put the cartridges in,
an hour.
Hit the proper. So it does take an hour.
Yeah, so it was in there it was called, I think Matt called it a soak.
Okay.
So a 1 hour soak.
Yeah.
And then from there to the freezer. And so I loaded the ammo in a couple of stages, so that I knew my initial plan at the beginning of the night was I was going to attempt to conduct this 31 degree test. And so I took ammo set A, so large Magnum, small Magnum. I put it in a regular freezer, which is set at, I think, setting 7. Setting 10 is 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and I did some quick Googling, and setting 7 should put me somewhere between like 10 and 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I put it in there for like an hour, probably an hour and a half. It took me about an hour and a half to get everything done from the loading perspective. In that freezer was also the cooler that I was transporting the ammunition in and the cold packs, which had been previously frozen. So I wanted to keep everything as cold as I could possibly keep it. And so it turned into kind of a dirty test, but I think it captured some very interesting things, as limited as it was. Sample size is very small too. But I think we got the spirit of that down pretty well. So I had done the warm weather test, the 64 degrees test, a couple days prior on a different set of ammunition, loaded on the same equipment, same settings, etc. All the brass was prepped at the same time, primed at the same time. And saw results that I expected, right? I was expecting SDs around what I found. I was expecting MVs around what I found. For the most part, some curious things. Do you want me to just dive into the numbers?
I think so.
Yes.
Any other questions before I start talking
so.
about charts, figures, and graphs? I also printed this on 3-point font, which was a mistake. So, like I said, I'm not divulging the charge weights. I will tell you it's below book maximum because I didn't know what I was really getting myself into. So, first thing I want to know is like what disadvantage do you see as a shooter from a muzzle velocity perspective right off the bat going from a small to a large? And curiously enough, it was about the same for both. I didn't see a remarkably more powerful number out of the Magnums in either. I saw a slight advantage in the Magnums with the large primers. I saw zero advantage in the Magnums with the smalls.
Okay.
From a velocity
muzzle
standpoint.
velocity.
Yeah. So going down the list here. So CCI small rifle versus CCI large rifle standards. Same load, same case, just primer size difference. My small rifle 10 round average was 2604. I had an SD of 11. Accuracy observed was sub MOA. These are 5 round strings. My large rifle, same everything, just primer difference. My MV average was 2622, so I picked up just under 20 feet per second, just switching to the primer.
Okay.
My SDs were about the same at 10.8. Accuracy observed, sub MOA.
Okay.
How do you feel about the fact that you were also checking accuracy while you had the magneto speed on the end of this thing?
So that's a great question. Up front, I was like, well, this is going to be goofy. So I shot the gun unsuppressed, suppressed, and then suppressed with magneto speed. Like I immediately anticipate I'm getting a POI shift out of the magneto speed on there, but I also hung a 16.8 ounce suppressor on the end of that barrel.
Right.
And it really did not change accuracy between the two. And so I did the initial accuracy test with factory Hornady 140 ELD, shot great. I then loaded up a test batch of large rifle primer standard in the alpha brass, shot it again. It actually shot better than the factory stuff. Which I anticipate it's hand-loaded ammo. It's a little bit more carefully done. But there was not a huge disparity at all, like a notable disparity at all.
And I suppose if you're consistent with it, you had the magneto speed on the same way every time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I mean, yeah, it's on there, but at least it was on the same way every time.
So I used the silicone band that comes with them that really makes them stick.
Yeah.
And then I'm going on the suppressor, which is 1.5 inches diameter on the OD. And then I preloaded the magneto speed, right? So the gun's going to want to move backwards. The magneto speed's going to want to stay forward. And what you end up with is you end up with like a subtle migration. And it's not a lot, but we've talked about like the influence that things have on muzzles as being dramatic, right? So if you preload the magneto speed, meaning you basically push the magneto speed forward so the strap looks like it's sideways, or at an angle, and you push it forward until it can't go forward anymore, it doesn't migrate and doesn't move. And my POIs never really changed throughout the test. I'd reach up and I'd check the tension on the suppressor. It's a direct thread to the barrel, so I was worried about it coming loose or something like that, which it didn't, thankfully. But I tried to keep that as buttoned up as possible. I would have preferred to have used an optical chronograph, but being indoor, iffy reliability, right?
Yeah, we found that.
Yeah. So we do have one that does work pretty well on the 100 with if we soak it with as much light as possible in there. It's from Competition Dynamics or Competition Electronic Dynamics, something like that. Really good little chronograph, very affordable. Didn't have access to it, so I made the best of what I could with the magneto speed. I did not see impactful or negative impact on the accuracy potential of the loads, with or without it. So
okay.
Sidebar. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
Very important though.
Yeah. So again, recap: small rifle, 2604 average, about an 11 SD, actually 11 flat. Large rifle, 2622 average, 10.8 SD. Both observed sub MOA. Right. Switching over to the large Magnum and small Magnum primers. Curiously, small rifle Magnum, I lost velocity. I went down to 2594. My SD dropped 0.2. My large rifle, I bumped up 11 feet per second to 26.33 with the Magnum. So I did see an increase in MV with the Magnum primer in that setting. Curiously, both, and this is the 64 degree or room temperature test that we were doing, both the Magnum loadings shot better than the non-Magnum loadings. Now, it's not like incredible, like, oh, I went from a minute to one hole. I went from sub-minute to slightly more sub-minute, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it was distinct and notable to me. It was like, oh, okay. So the small rifle Magnum at that temperature shot better than the small rifle non-Magnum. The large rifle Magnum at that temperature shot better than that.
Can I ask another clarifying question?
Please.
As a not even enthusiast reloader.
Yeah.
I've reloaded once. The difference between standard and Magnum primer, does the Magnum just have more juice?
So
like, does it just prime harder?
I have heard, and this is something, yeah, prime harder. This is something I really want to dig into, and I want to talk to the folks that build primers to get the definitive answer on this. I've heard this 30 different ways.
Okay.
I have heard 11% more priming, like tenacity. I've heard.
Do they just pack more stuff in there?
I think it's a different compound. I will tell you this: I weighed them, and they do weigh different amounts.
Okay.
So, like Magnum versus non-Magnum in both large and small, there's about a 2 gram difference between the two.
Is the Magnum more?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I would expect.
I've also heard that the change is only cup hardness.
Oh, that's another theory or potential fact. Okay.
Like it's going to almost like relief. Like, okay, like the large rifle Magnum would almost be like softer because it's going to have it's going to be harder.
Yeah. I've heard
Prime's harder.
Well, I know it prime's harder, but I was expecting something that would maybe like have more relief faster.
No, so the cup itself is a harder alloy. And then it's the Wild West on the differences between these primers.
Okay.
Because people I talked to prior to this test had told me like, oh, it's good you're using those primers because they're the hardest. And then I read elsewhere, those primers are actually not the hardest. Wouldn't be recommended for this test because they're so soft. Or like a particular primer within the set, not all of them, but a particular primer within the set, too soft, can't use it. You should be using these primers. And there's a ton of, I'm not going to call it disinformation because I don't actually know from like a metallurgy perspective or from a chemical formulation perspective what the very real differences are between these two. We understand that the Magnum primers have more compound or a different compound, a more volatile compound, and they produce more energy when detonated. The physical...
So we do know that.
Do we need to talk to a primer expert?
Oh, I would love to. I would love to dig into this as deep as possible.
Does anybody out there work for a priming company who listens to this and would like to come talk to us?
Want to dive down the old primer rabbit hole?
And then the conversation started
Prime.
around match primers versus not match primers, and then military primers versus standard primers, and what are the differences between all of these primers. And it came down to, well, I'm glad I've got some primers because it looks like they all will do the job,
right,
if appropriate.
Okay.
But a wild deal. Anyway, so I've digressed again.
Can I ask another question?
I've had
Please.
It's my clarifying questions keep messing this up.
As you're talking about, I guess the accuracy component of these room temp rounds, were your shots somewhat less rushed because you didn't have the time constraints of like, it's going to change temperature? Or
yes, absolutely. Interestingly enough, I think I shot better with the cold ammunition overall.
Less time, less overthinky.
If I look at the pile of targets that I now have, and I go through them, like there were some standouts. Like the small rifle Magnum at 64 degrees was a single round flyer, which Jim and I chatted about last night a little bit. First round always landed differently from the first 5 rounds. And I don't know enough about suppressors, and I'm too ignorant to necessarily understand how they work on the inside to offer an explanation for this. First round was always point of aim. Rounds 2 through 5 were always together, just slightly off, like 10th mil, maybe.
Oh gosh, a 10th mil.
I mean, it's not insignificant.
No.
No, but
because I'll tell you, when I fired the first round, I was like, perfect, right in the black. Fired the second round, I was like, oh no, like it's going sideways. But then they'd all land on top of each other. So like the small rifle Magnum, both sets, so 10 rounds total, 2 subsets of 5, 1 round flyers, first rounds. Right, well, I can't even call them a flyer because they were exactly where I was aiming.
Right.
And then the subsequent 4 rounds, all touching each other. It's like, that's a good load. Like, I'm going to go back to that load.
Yeah.
Had good SDs, certainly good enough SDs for a hunter and for somebody who's limiting his shots to, around 500 yards or in. I'm all about that. That was a good load. But overall, I think I shot a little better on the cold tests until I fumbled around.
Because you're cold as ice.
Yeah, I don't know.
Iceman.
It was a good speed drill.
Good under duress.
I mentioned that last night. It was a really good speed drill to load, get on target, and execute a shot in like 2 seconds or 3 seconds.
Wipe the frost off.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So that was that. The factory ammo at room temperature. So it's factory Hornady 140 ELDs, stuff that we shoot thousands of rounds of here at Vortex and that the Edge class uses for their long range stuff. Spectacular ammunition. My MV was 2670 average on a 10 round with a 14.1 SD. So, and it shot about MOA. So 2 5-round strings landed about MOA.
Okay.
Which is about my capability. I'm not a spectacular group shooter necessarily. So that was that. So introduce the chili, and we see some interesting things. So starting at the top, CCI small rifle, everything's the same. We have now just put it between 0 and 15 degrees Fahrenheit. My MV average dropped 4 feet per second over 10 rounds. So I went from 2604 on an average to 2600. My SDs dropped by almost 50%. So I went from an 11 SD to 6.7. So I guess it's not quite 50%. Dropped significantly.
Yeah.
I went from an 11 to a 6.7.
That's notable.
Yes. Accuracy observed, sub MOA, better. So I have some theories as to why that is. That I have no idea if they're valid. If this was...
Well, when things get cold, they just sort of tighten up.
So what I thought was a subtle increase in neck tension.
Okay.
Which would explain, potentially, a lower SD.
Well, I mean, not all case compounds at their very most atomic level are the same, right?
Sure.
And so, likewise with bullet compounds. Yep. And you have 2 different types of metal there coming together. That could change from case to case and bullet to bullet. I mean, there's infinitely many combinations of cases and metallurgically speaking, that's cases and bullet combos. We've seen this. I mean, you can see this in all kinds of mechanical devices when different types of metal shrink at different rates or react to temperature changes at different rates. So in this particular test, I mean, and we're hypothesizing here, but yeah, maybe you had a little bit increased neck tension as the temperature got colder, but I wonder, if somebody were to mimic this test with different case, different bullet.
Yep. Would we see
the same
different
thing?
or otherwise?
Yeah.
One thing I did note, different POI.
Okay.
Yes.
Hey, that's like that one question that we were getting at too. We'll have to test this when it gets back to winter as well. Is does your zero change as the temperature changes?
Right.
We all know that your ballistics and stuff that you have to plug in and that will get spit out in a ballistics calc changes, but a lot of times people assume the same zero though.
So different POI, which was interesting. Not like wildly significant, not like off the paper onto the other target, but significant enough that I really want to monkey with that and dig into that. So anyway, CCI small rifle, 0 to 15 degrees, observed velocity, 2,600 feet per second, observed SD, 6.7, sub MOA. So That was neat. CCI large rifle. This one was quizzical. I picked up 11 feet per second over my warm weather test. I went to 2633 average MV, and my SDs went down again to 8.4. Sub MOA maintained. Small rifle Magnum, nominal increase in MV 2601. So the warm weather test yielded 2594 on an average. My SDs again shrank 8.7 compared to 10.8. Observed sub MOA. Here again, the small rifle Magnum loading at both temperatures produced the best groups. So that was interesting.
Of everything?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Large rifle Magnum. I lost velocity, so my small rifle and my large rifle inverted with temperature. And so I know what you're thinking. You mix the primers up. So prior to priming, I marked the cases very distinctly. And then I made sure I only had one set of primers out and one set of cases available, so I could not do that. Well, I suppose I still could.
You'd have to be a bit of a knucklehead to do it. Yeah.
So all the Magnum prime cases were primed at one time. All the non-Magnum cases were primed at one time. All the small rifle standards primed at one time. All the small rifle Magnums primed at one time, all separate from each other. So my SDs dropped when it got cold. My MVs were mostly unaffected, if affected nominally, right? Not a huge value. Ignition issues, none perceived. Everything looked, felt, sounded as if it was working famously. A couple of notables. If you take a case out of the cooler and in your haste, you go to wipe it because it's covered in snow and you knock it out of your hand onto the shooting bench and you're like, oh my God, that's an extra second. And you just like haphazardly wipe it and throw it in your gun. You pull the trigger. You will feel a higher degree of recoil, a different sound, and your MV will spike notably. So I went from a 26.22 average, 26.26 average on the large rifle Magnum primer cold weather test to a 26.80 on the one that I fumbled.
Oh, well, because there's still some frost probably on the case and pressure spike.
Yep, and so there was some pressure signs on the case then as well.
Wow.
I had some ejector swipe. I had some primer flattening, minor cratering, and I laughed. I thought, okay, just be a little more cognizant when you're pulling this out of the, little box there.
That's
significant.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and that in a nutshell is what I observed. So it seems safe to shoot in this test. Does not seem to be negatively impacted by the influence of a colder temperature, and in some ways all positively impacted, which I need to noodle on a little bit more. I tried to keep everything as even Steven as possible. Oh, prior to freezing, the cases were wiped with a dry cloth and then wiped with a cloth with a solvent on it to make sure that I got all the oils and all the sizing lubricant off of them. So they were loaded, cleaned, and then frozen.
Sweet. You know what I feel like? So obviously, we know that there's a ton of variables in this. We know that the experiment wasn't, like some ironclad
No.
Institute of Vortex Research and Technology, whatever. And so I'm thinking more about, and when we revisit this and it's actually cold outside, like what the differences will be where the air that the bullet is going through is cold. So then we're going to be, in some ways, that was a constant here, that the bullet was always flying through the same air.
Yeah.
Whereas when we, in the wintertime, shoot on the indoor range with room temperature ammunition, and then we go outside and we shoot with cold ammunition, which is all, and the rifle itself has been acclimated to the cold and all that stuff, the air that the bullets are flying through will be notably different.
Yeah.
So, it's almost hard to, or maybe even impossible, to actually have this where you're just only studying one variable change, which is the primers. But I am thinking, like, when we do this cold test, you even brought it up yourself, like, the rifle is getting hot. So if you slam 5 rounds through it and it's cold outside, the ammo is cold and it's been acclimated, and we would have to have the rifle be acclimated, which would be a different thing because your rifle is room temperature, and all we're doing is sticking cold ammo in it. Like how much is that going to be warming up the bullet? And you think about a lot of what we talk about very often is hunting applications for things. Now, certainly there's a PRS or competitive shooting application where you are shooting multiple rounds in succession, fairly short order. But in a hunting situation, you really rely heavily on that first round.
Yeah,
you may get another one off, but that first round is extremely important. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, do you do this test where you actually allow the rifle to cool fully, and so every shot that you take is basically like a first round?
You'd have to.
Yeah.
You'd have to.
I was thinking the same thing. And I do, it's funny as we think about this, and you guys just brought this up. But yeah, the ammunition was the only thing
cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said, Jimmy, we go outside, we take our time. The entire system's going to be cold. The air the bullet is passing through is going to be cold. But I'm glad you did this, Ryan, because now we have another set of data points to compare to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for now, like I'm looking at this, the entire premise of this, aside from the discovery, is what difference does it make, is offering me as a hand loader, or anybody listening as a hand loader that's in the same boat that we all are right now, where it's obtaining large rifle primers, which is seemingly still very, very difficult to next to impossible for some of us. Another option for you if you're shooting this class of case.
Yeah.
Yep. Caveat, right?
Correct. Right. So
they didn't seem grossly off from one another, which, again, there's more stuff that we can test and that we will test, but you assume, especially if you're running the same powder, and you would assume that with the differences we introduced and the fact that they all still functioned fine, that it seems like in reloading there's a way to make just about anything work as long as it functions.
Yep.
And you definitely got the function test, I'd say, 80 to 90% of the way there.
Yep.
That's good news.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it like, okay, well, so here's a off-shelf solution in this alpha brass. There's other companies that make this brass too. So like Lapua Small Pocket has been around for a long time. It's very expensive, and alpha is not inexpensive. Starline is very affordable brass. It's very good brass. They also make small pocket stuff. I surmise that we're going to see more coming out from these folks that are making ammunition and they're making brass, either for component purchase or assembled ammunition with small primers. If it doesn't seem to the ballisticians, who are doing this professionally, not just recreationally, if it doesn't seem to have a super negative impact, I think from like a business standpoint, well, gosh, if I could prime a case with a primer that isn't affecting the reliability of the ammunition or the quality of the ammunition, a small rifle primer has considerably less material in it. And if you're making primers and you're making 1 million of them at a time, like you can save some money using small rifle primers, right? And I think that's super cool too. So I'm walking away from it, I guess, happy to know that the gun still goes bang. Like that satiated that big question that I had, is whether I could do this or not. Now knowing that, okay, I have a quantity of small rifle primers, I can stay in the game longer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my big takeaway from this experiment, and also what you've observed. Companies aren't going to make this brass that's optimized for a small rifle primer if it's not going to work.
Oh, right, exactly.
Right?
But also your testing showed it's kind of a wash.
Yep.
And you can be confident knowing that you've got a degree of flexibility in how you can load ammunition and still be effective and still get the results you want when, component A may be less available or what you have on hand or whatever the case may be.
Golly. I have a question that may be incredibly dumb. Probably is incredibly dumb. Maybe not, though. It starts with a different question. So is the flash hole size between a large primer pocket case and a small primer pocket case the same or different?
In these cases, it's the same.
It's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
right.
here comes the potentially dumb question. What if somebody made an insert, a shim, if you will, that could surround the small primer, and then you could actually insert a small primer into a large primer pocket case? Is the depth of the primer different? Are they shallower? Or like, I mean, you're probably talking, like I said, this is probably a dumb thought because there could be variables that come into play, or the shim, something gets all mucked up as you're trying to insert this. But man, it'd be cool if somebody figured out a way to. I mean, there's so much like 65 Creedmoor, and most of the stuff you find if you're some sort of range brass rat is going to be large primer pocket.
Oh, completely right.
And so if you could retrofit. So really be something.
I can't believe you're talking about shimming primers.
It's not an invalid thought process, right? So this kind of exists. If you look at a 209 primer, this is for shot shells, modern inline muzzleloaders. That is a primer, like a traditional looking primer within a sleeve.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And then if you look at some of like the muzzleloading technology out there, and we'll swing way back to the Knight disc rifle.
That's where my head was going.
This is a primer in a sleeve. Our good friend Luke Horak at Arrowhead Rifles, he makes the large rifle Magnum module, which is a primer within a sleeve. And so the premise exists already, right? And to do it on that scale, well, I'm certain it's doable, right? What would we make it out of? Would it be, I mean, there's a considerable dimensional difference. So I don't know if we have a 223 case sitting around here somewhere.
Oh, we do. There's one right behind you, actually.
Oh, yeah, look at that. So if you look at these two, there's a notable size difference between the small rifle and the large.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Right? Enough to fit some material in, potentially.
Correct. Yeah, and I suppose you could do it. There's a slight height difference between the two primers.
There is. Okay, I was wondering.
But I think that's overcomeable, right? So depending on how you make that sleeve. And then it'd be kind of a little pain in the butt to get in there.
Yeah.
Because you almost have like a double priming operation.
Right.
But maybe I'm just not thinking about it hard enough at the moment.
I mean, I clearly didn't think about it very hard before I asked it, but
no, I don't think it's an invalid thought.
You've got that. You got some of that engineering mind.
Do we?
I like to modify.
Yeah. This is where we have to say patent pending.
You know what? Let's just be safe. Patent pending.
Okay. So I think you could do it. I think getting the little primer into the little sleeve into the big primer hole would be an interesting challenge because we're working with pretty small stuff. It's been a long time since I've loaded small rifle primers one at a time. So like usually all my small rifle primer consumption goes to my Dillon 650. So
where you just
I'm loading
loading
a tube with 100 and change primers in it. And so I'm not handling them. I'm just like sucking them up in this primer pickup tube, and then I'm dumping it into my primer reservoir, and then I just never see them. Right? They just come out, and then it's like picking up a small rifle primer. This brings me back to when I used to shoot competitive multi-gun, and I loaded all my ammunition for that one at a time, single stage.
Yeah.
And I did like a 2,300 round lot one month, and like. Picking up those miniature primers, it was just like, oh wow, those suckers are
Get
tiny.
You some tweezers.
They make them. I mean, you can get them. I've gotten
like a little crucible for.
I've gotten dexterous enough to pick them up and throw them in there. But it was just delightful to see it work. And when you look at that case head and there's just that itty bitty little primer in there, I'm like, you are adorable. And then to see it go bang reliably a number of times and not be erratic and not be muted or compromised in any way from significant performance advantage or otherwise was just awesome. So I think I'm gonna load this brass for hunting ammunition should I choose to use a 6.5 Creedmoor this year.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And your testing has just led to likely more testing.
I like that.
Can you quick rattle off a few of the cartridges once again that are in this class where it could go either way? So 6.5 Creed we've mentioned. I think 308 we've mentioned.
Yep. So assigned 308, probably the largest caliber that you'd see this done. So, and this is availability. 308, 708. I believe 7 SAW now, which is a really cool cartridge.
7 SAW?
Yeah.
Like SAW?
Yep.
We got to talk about that.
It's a neat round. I'm trying to get myself away from proprietary wildcat-ish stuff. That's a cartridge that's making me look at. So I've long been enamored by the 708.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you told me not to get one. I'm still mad at you about that.
I did because you don't hand load.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then the 7 SAW and 7 SAW Type 2 come out. And Jimmy Jordan turned me on to this. He's like, you got to look at a 7 SAW. And I'm like, I forgot that was even a blip on the radar. And it's like a 708 Ackley, but without all the headaches of Ackley chambers. And you can get brass right now from Alpha. Yeah, and West Texas Ordnance. So anyway, so 308, 708, 7 SAW, I think they make that in a small pocket. 6XC, which Mark you've hunted with before. 6.5 Creedmoor, of course. 6 Creedmoor. 6 Lapua or 6x47 Lapua. 6.5 by 47 Lapua. I believe 22-250. I think that somebody makes a small pocket there, but I think 308 class cases, cases loosely based around it. And then possibly 243. Possibly. I'd have to look and see if somebody's definitively making a small pocket. But you could take, or like 260, you could take 708 brass and turn it into a 260 or 243. You could take 308 brass and turn it into a 260 or 243 if you had a small pocket. And actually, Lightweight Dave, when it was prior to the small pocket Creedmoor brass coming out, was making Creedmoor brass from small pocket 308.
He was?
Yeah.
I'm surprised because what weighs more, a primer or brass?
So primers are typically made out of cartridge brass.
Oh. So I was just wondering, because obviously your case head material would be
Right.
more
would be greater
right? With a small pocket, and then the primer would be smaller. And so I was trying to think.
It's got to be a wash.
I wouldn't doubt it if he didn't weigh. Yeah. If he didn't weigh
disgust me.
The primers and the case, I'd be shocked.
Yeah.
So part of me also wonders, we did this test with the 6.5 Creed.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something inherent to the 6.5 Creed that makes it extremely forgiving? Like, are any of the cartridges you mentioned less forgiving than the 6.5 Creedmoor, such that maybe these small, minute changes would cause potential greater differences? Or are all these kind of 308-based cartridges pretty easy going?
Pretty easy going.
I mean, the 308 itself, we all know, is extremely forgiving.
Pretty easy going in
So
general,
it
right?
makes sense that most things based off of it would be.
So having loaded 308 for a long time, that's a cartridge you almost can't goof up.
Right.
It's very easy to play with. Loading 243 for a long time, a bit more temperamental. Whether that's, I guess maybe my ability as a hand loader at the time I started loading it relative to 308, which was later, or something inherent to the cartridge mouth diameter, like the case mouth diameter and the 6mm bore. Loading 6.5 Creedmoor seems as easy as 308.
Right.
It's, when we do the edge reloading class, it's 6.5 Creedmoor because it's such a forgiving cartridge to load. Your expectations are usually met pretty quickly and clearly. I don't know though. I don't know if like we institute, or substitute 6XC into this. Do we see something remarkably different?
Right.
Or the Lapua cartridges. Scott Parks is a early adopter of the 6.5x47 Lapua and also the 6x47 Lapua. And he talks about...
and that one he said is pretty temperamental.
Yes. He said that was a very difficult cartridge to act the way, or to get to act the way he wanted it to. And he finally figured it out, right? He cracked the egg and got what he was looking for out of that cartridge. But he says it was nowhere near what the 6.5x47 Lapua gave him from a forgiveness standpoint or an ease of loading standpoint or consistency standpoint.
Well, in the 6x47 Lapua, that was very temperamental. Isn't that what led him to ultimately do the 6 Vortex or whatever? Yeah, right.
Correct. Yep. Which is funny, right? So is it just a bore diameter change that makes something inherently more or less forgivable?
So many variables.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's got Vortex in the name, it's got to be easy to deal with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Very friendly. Very friendly. Every time you call it up, it answers.
Yep.
Real human being.
Yes. That is a good question, though. So I also have this brass and 308. So
yeah,
I'm going to try that too because I like hunting with my 308s, and I've got a new 308 that I'm looking to hunt with this year, and I'll monkey with it and see what happens there. I'm very curious to adding considerably more mass to the equation. Like if I take a 308 and I load it up with like a 168 grain projectile or 180 grain projectile, does something dramatic happen? And I just don't know. So it may be interesting to
more to test.
Yeah.
Next time we come back with this, we'll have to have tested considerably. People probably won't hear about it until like late winter.
Sure.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I'm actually most interested in, and it has nothing to do with the primers. It's the cold weather POI shift.
Sure.
I too am also.
And
as well.
I mean, that's...
Or, potential for, I should say, not like it's this absolute... But, you look at when you just run your numbers in a ballistics calculator and you change that temp number, right? It goes up and down.
Yep.
But is that, and I'm going to think, no, it's not accounting for the entire weapon system being at that temperature. The cartridge being at that temp. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm. I'll tell you this, from experience, certain powders alone exhibit wildly different performance at different temperature bands. Like crazy different performance. I worked up a load for a particular cartridge with a particular powder that I shall not name. That it was probably in like the upper 40s, low 50s, and it was just smoking. Really cool load, very flat, very, very consistent, excellent. Shelved it, revisited it in the summertime, and had immediate overpressure signs. Sticky bolt lift, ejector swipe. That gun's got dual ejectors on it, 2 big stamps in the back of that case, primer cratering, primer flattening.
Wow.
Like
all the things.
Bad news bears. And I'd heard tell of this powder being extremely temp sensitive. And then I heard other people say, no, don't worry about it. Never worked with it before. Threw it in the case. Yup, definitely. This stuff, H4350, it's a Hodgdon extreme powder. They're renowned for their temp stability across a massive swing of temperature from very cold to very warm. Very small test, very small subset of data showing me that is in fact the case. That's been my experience too as a shooter of this powder specifically, H4350, for quite some time. I've never seen resoundingly different performances in July or December. So the cold weather POI shift, that'll be a fun one to like check off the list on all of the things that could create POI shift.
Let's come up with a list.
Well, and then like
topics.
you said, you're testing. You can't test all the powders, like there's just infinite combinations, right? But like I guess where I would look at it is like you're saying, take a powder that's known for being temperature stable,
4350,
and then so you can kind of rule that variable out, and then kind of attack the other ones.
Yep.
Do you remember, Mark, some 5 or whatever odd years ago when we started the podcast and we were like, what happens when we run out of topics? And we still haven't run out of topics, and I just don't ever see us ever running out of topics for this.
No, I've got like,
every time.
I mean, there's
like 6.
Every time we do a podcast, I'm just left with more questions.
There's so many topics that have spiraled off of just this test alone. We're on episode 100, 2, 3, I don't know how many.
We're getting close to
episodes.
3.
And that's just counting like episodes. It doesn't even count the 10-minute talks that we've done over 10 minutes, which are basically anyway, so many spin-offs from this.
It is something I think people should pay close attention to is what do weather extremes do to your equipment. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Like batteries, for instance.
Yeah.
You went down the rabbit hole on batteries and learned me so many things on batteries, but I still don't know what direction to go. I understand it's lithium. That's the direction I need to go. baseline.
Yeah. I mean,
he's talking about in his vehicle, Jim. Battery operated vehicle.
Oh, if Ryan had a battery operated vehicle, I'd probably fully disown him at that point.
You know what he texted me? It's like, I got a rental. It's a Tacoma. Ugh.
It was,
Dude, it hurts so bad. Oh man.
It
was the slowest thing I've ever driven.
So okay, now we're triple sidetracking here, but I was talking to my wife again because I think I can't remember if this was on air or off air, but I was like, I was trying to get her at least to look at a Subaru Outback.
Oh yeah, the Tacoma wagon.
And then. But
I can't even be mad at that because it's so funny.
But
it's true.
Let me tell you this, and this is a compliment to the Tacoma. That doesn't seem like a. I think the Tacoma is a capable truck, right? So the wagon would just be like, it would fit her needs, in my opinion, better than a truck. So it'd be like a wagon that does some truck things. And that's what I wanted.
Okay.
I don't know. You didn't with that comment.
If you can't see Jim's face,
you didn't talk me out of it.
If you can't see Jim's face, this is like when I asked my dad for more allowance, but didn't bring anything more to the table, and he's just deadpan.
Yeah. Are you done yet?
Yep. I don't think Jim's on board with that idea.
I've been in a Tacoma wagon, a newer one. And that's exactly what it was. If you're into that.
Okay, so what would be better than that? What would you suggest?
I got some thoughts. We'll talk off air.
All right. Well,
we're off topic again.
Yeah.
The cold weather thing though, that's where we started at.
Yeah.
The extreme temps it's very true. We also got to do the one thing we get hot up here.
Yeah.
But we don't get like West Texas hot.
No.
You know what I mean? Like if your rifle's been cooking in the back of your car and it's 140 degrees back there, something like that, and then you take it out and you start shooting it and it's just getting beat on by the sun. Extreme heat.
Are you suggesting we go aoudad hunting?
Yeah. I mean
that's what I heard.
I guess I wasn't, but when you brought it up, yeah.
I'll tell you though, so we were just on the long range the other day, and it was in the upper 80s. I think it was 88. And we were doing some shooting, and the guns got hot.
Well, yeah, the sun's beating down on them. It's already hot.
Yep.
The guns are shooting. They're getting hot.
Yep.
And we know all the time we're talking about you yourself. You did 5-round groups, and then you forced air through the gun to cool it down so it didn't mess with stuff.
So I've noticed
extreme
this.
Temps, dude.
I've noticed this doing range certification. So I sled load each round one at a time when I range certify rifle scope. If I take a round and I put it in and I chamber up and I get into position and I'm in that position too long, and by too long I'm like 5 seconds.
Oh, you're cooking it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking that cartridge out. It is hot to the touch. Not like burn your hand, but like notably warmer. That cartridge goes back into the box. I take a fresh cartridge out. I get settled. I close bolt and execute the shot. It's not a situation again in which I'm leaving the target.
Yeah.
But if I'm working on a really good group with a customer's optic, that round is likely to leave that group.
See, now I'm wondering, like, you're at a PRS competition, you're on a stage, right? And you're changing between distances, or you're maybe shooting at a more difficult target.
Yep.
And some people will leave the bolt open and then wait until they're on target before they close the bolt and execute a shot. Some people are a little bit more quick to throw a new round in the chamber and have the bolt closed, but then they're sitting there with the bolt closed for a while. It's, yeah.
Yeah. I guess we got to test that too.
Too many things to test.
It'd be interesting to have some sort of I don't know if you could actually get like a really accurate temperature reading from inside the chamber, other than having like one of them little laser guns or something like that tells you the temperature of stuff. I'd be curious to see if it's a bit like a what do they call those kinds of graphs, where it starts to level out in terms of like the temperature rising of your chamber.
You could only get it so hot.
Like,
right?
How many rounds, what I'm wondering is how many rounds it takes, and we've seen this on different guns. Certain guns, it's like 3 rounds and everything's just gone to hell in a handbasket. Some guns are way more consistent. You can get 10 rounds out of them before they're really getting too hot. But, like, just watching a chamber heat up and heat up and heat up and then just hit that point where it's like, oh, yep, everything's falling apart.
Yep. On my Kimber, that is round number 4.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the barrel heating up, of course, too. I'm just saying, the word I was saying was chamber, but it's heating up, too.
Mm-hmm. Neat.
Temperature.
So hot right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Don't they have aren't some big artillery like liquid cooled barrels and stuff, or isn't there
so,
or some like crew served weapons and stuff like that? Don't they have like? I may be totally making that.
Are you thinking up like I think I've seen in movies where like they have like a machine gun and they dump water on it?
So yeah, if you go back in time and you're looking at like some of the original like Maxims, they had a reservoir tank that you would fill with water to keep the gun cool. And then when your water evaporated, you'd have to come up with a fluid to fill it.
You know what I think I'm going to try and come up with?
What's that?
I think I'm going to try. It's going to be a stock, and in the butt stock, it's going to have a water reservoir. It's not going to be big. It's going to be small. It's going to have a water reservoir, and it's going to have channels that run up through the stock, and then it runs around the barrel. And then you can turn it on with like a little 12-volt battery thing, a little pump, and it pumps water up to the barrel, and it swirls it around, and then it comes back. There's like a hot side and a cold side. And then it just keeps circulating that through, and then maybe even you have like a little radiator back at the stock.
Do you know what
and you can just liquid cool your barrel.
You ever have one of those friends growing up whose parents had like an aquarium, and it's got like the little bubblers in there?
Oh yeah,
and like some of the fish like to hang around the bubbles. I'm just thinking like bubbles moving around the barrel, and what
I'm gonna try and come up with a liquid cooled barrel solution.
Heck yeah,
seems super practical.
It will be.
You better patent it.
You know what I'm going to do, too? I'm going to make it really expensive. Then you can't help yourself. You're going to want it.
Oh, that's funny.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up this episode, Ryan.
But not this test.
Part 2 of the primer experiment.
Yeah.
And thank you for all the work that you did. It's quite interesting. It's left us with a lot of questions. I would be curious if anybody else out there has done some similar experimenting, what their results are, what they've seen. And apparently we have another experiment to do this winter when I think we can reliably assume it's going to get a lot colder here in good old Wisconsin. So,
Yep. One thing you can't assume these days is that it's going to rain in Wisconsin.
No, been a little bit dry. But all right. Well, until next time, everybody, happy hunting and shooting. We'll catch you on the next one. And, tell us what you know. Bye.
See you.
Bye.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.